Christians are targeted because Christians are an easy target, because Christians are the group that has already been designated by the radical Islamic ideology in the region as people who it's okay to kill. The devil is here, and he's making war on the followers of Jesus because he knows that his time is short.
Joel Veldkamp, welcome to Into the Supernatural. It's always great to have you. How you doing today?
I'm good, thank God. Good to be with you, Billy.
You know, there's a lot to talk about. Obviously, we've had you on numerous times here on the show talking through what is going on around the world. And one of the things we talk about on this show is the fact that, this word supernatural, I mean, everything is really supernatural. But a lot of the events that we talk about, I work in news in my full-time job. I'm talking about events all the time through a Christian lens, but we sometimes forget that a lot of what is happening in the world, it's really part of a spiritual battle. It's what we see in Ephesians 6, which we talk quite a bit about on the show here. And the spiritual is sort of pouring over into the natural world. And so we experience a lot of these things and we talk about them in headlines and news, but we don't necessarily always understand what's happening behind the scenes. But we want to get into a couple of issues today. We want to talk about Nigeria and Iran. Now, Nigeria has been in the headlines because of the intense persecution. More Christians die there than anywhere else. It's 80% plus of the persecution we see happening around the world is happening in Nigeria right now. Let's just go back to Easter a few weeks back. This is important. There was a horrific headline that came out from Nigeria. Dozens of people killed. Talk a little bit about what happened there.
Mm-hmm. So actually, on both Palm Sunday and Easter, there was a string of attacks against Christians in central Nigeria, in an area that we call the Middle Belt. So on Palm Sunday, in the major city of Jos in Plateau State, in the evening at around 8 p.m., there's a central marketplace in the city where mostly Christians go to do business. And some men in trucks drove up and just opened fire on everyone there. About 28 people were killed in a matter of minutes, men, women, and children. And Jos has been the flashpoint of attacks on Christians a few times in the past 25 years, but it hasn't seen any major violence for, I would say, 10 years or so. So this is really a bad sign that the conflict is moving back into the urban centers of central Nigeria. And then on Easter, two different churches in Kaduna State were attacked during Easter worship services, and 12 Christians were killed in those churches. And then in Benue State to the south, another Christian village was attacked and 17 people were killed, all on Easter morning. These attacks are coming from what we call the Fulani militia groups. These are Muslim militias that are trying to push Christians out of this region so that they can take their land, and so that this whole part of Nigeria will be a Muslims-only zone.
Okay, so it's horrific, and we've seen these things happen again and again and again. There's been some speculation and debate around whether or not, is this a persecution issue? Is it not a persecution issue? Is it an economic issue? How do you deal with those questions? Because it feels for sure, and push back if I'm wrong, there are a lot of other issues going on in Nigeria too, and many of them feel like they're persecution issues. So just, can you respond to some of that?
Sure. I think for Into the Supernatural, I think it's appropriate to go straight to the book of Revelation, which is the book that talks the most about persecution of any book in the Bible. And in Revelation chapter 17 and 18, we get a vision of Babylon, of the big earthly power that drives the persecution of Christians. And in chapter 18 of Revelation, Babylon is overthrown, and we see all of the merchants of the world come together and mourn over Babylon, because the fact that Babylon has fallen means that all of their profits are going to go away. So I would say there's usually an economic aspect to religious persecution. Very, very seldom is it that persecution is just about stopping people from practicing Christianity. Usually, the persecutors tell their followers, if you kill Christians, you can take their stuff. You can take their houses, you can take their land, you can take their cars. That's how you mobilize people to go into a village and open fire and kill 20 people randomly. So the motivation can be economic for some people, but Christians are targeted because Christians are an easy target, because Christians are the group that has already been designated by the radical Islamic ideology in the region as people who it's okay to kill. So for people who say it's not really religious, it's actually economic, I would say you're missing the point. The point is that Christians are being driven off of their land by persecutors who promise their followers that they'll benefit if they do so.
Hey, I'm Billy Hallowell, and I have something to tell you. This is really, really important. It's about Christian Solidarity International, which is an organization that I absolutely love. Now, as hard as it might be for us to comprehend here in America, but there are people in other parts of the world, all over the world, whose very lives are being threatened simply because they believe in Jesus. In fact, people are being enslaved, very literally, for their faith. Some of these people have been detained for 25 or even 30 years. Now, if you've been listening to me for any period of time, you know that I am passionate about the work that Christian Solidarity International does. This is work to help the persecuted church all over the world. There are hundreds of thousands of people who are persecuted and enslaved in the Middle East alone. The headlines right now are obviously very focused on the Middle East, and so that's why I want to talk about this today. Now, together we can very literally, and this is amazing, buy their freedom and save the lives of some precious brothers and sisters in Christ right now. We can do that right now, giving them the joy and the hope that we celebrate here in America so freely. For only $250, you can provide life-saving aid. You can actually buy a believer's freedom and provide them with what they need: food, a goat, other necessary goods for their very survival. Now, these are brothers and sisters in Christ enslaved and fearing for their lives. They need us. Now, let's get back to the $250. Maybe you can give more. Maybe you can give even a portion, but every single gift helps. You can actually go right now to www.csi-usa.org, and you can do what you can right there to help. You'll see my picture when you scroll down. Click on that where it says give, and give whatever you can. That's www.csi-usa.org. Thank you so much. No, and it's so interesting that you bring that up too, because this goes into the spiritual aspects of things. A lot of times you don't even realize when it comes to persecution, people may not realize that they're actually behaving in a way that is motivated by evil and, demonic evil, and how they are actually persecuting and responding. So there's so many complex elements of this. And mentioning the book of Revelation is interesting too, because obviously this is widely seen as an end times book that is prophesying at least parts of it. Not everybody's on board with all of it, things that have yet to come. And when you look at global persecution, this is something that on paper should be getting better, right? The world is modernizing. The world is, we should, but it's getting worse, right? And so that, I don't know if you want to reflect on that at all, but that is interesting to me when you look at the biblical narrative and what it's talking about in Revelation, and you compare to the statistics that we are seeing around the globe. It's a pretty dire situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'll hasten to caution your audience that I am not a theologian by training. I'm just a Christian who reads my Bible when I can, as best as I can. And certainly a lot of the book of Revelation is about the end times. But if we go to chapter 12, we see a vision not of the end times, but of 2,000 years ago, of when Jesus is born. Jesus comes into the world, and the devil, the great dragon, tries to kill him, tries to get rid of him before he can save humanity. Of course, he fails. And then the book of Revelation says he was thrown to the earth, and he's full of rage, and he's going to make war on all the people who follow Jesus. So that part of Revelation is not about something still to come. That part of Revelation has been happening for 2,000 years, and it's still happening today. The devil is here, and he's making war on the followers of Jesus because he knows that his time is short. And as you say, the world is modernizing, technology is increasing, connectivity is increasing across the world. That has many benefits in God's mercy, but it also enhances the capacity of human beings to do evil to each other, and the capacity of the forces of evil to take advantage of human beings, to organize human beings in big groups. There's always been violence, there's always been war, but this kind of industrial killing that we saw in the Holocaust, for example, was enabled by modern technology, or the great purges under Stalin in Russia. And today, where we have like these hyper modern terrorist groups like ISIS that connect people around the world and enable them to kill people around the world.
Yeah. Can I just step in there for a minute? Because this is really interesting what you brought up the Holocaust, and I was literally going to say, I love that you brought up Revelation 12. We also have seen, and I want to be careful how I word this, that the Jewish people and the state of Israel have also been under consistent attack before. Now you go back to the book of Esther, right? You go back to the slavery in Egypt. You go back to there were repeated times where it feels as though very clearly the Hebrew people, the Israeli people were being wiped out or attempted wipe out again and again and again. You saw this October 7th. You saw it again, obviously, in the Holocaust. This has been a repeated theme, and that is separate from the Christian theme of what has gone on, right? And this is all tied together, obviously, because of Jesus coming through that lineage, right? And then obviously Christianity coming on the scene as really the continuation of the plan that was always there. So this is like more than we can cover right now, but this has been a repeated spiritual theme on both ends there, and I think that's really interesting. And so we're not going to talk much about Israel, but I wanted to bring that up because I do think we're watching that sort of parallel. And so the Christians are facing this persecution. The Nigerian persecution is so horrific. Can you talk a little bit more about what, from a 30,000 foot level, and I know this is complicated because you have multiple groups. It's not just the Fulani. You've got other groups there too that are operating. What else is going on in Nigeria and what it is like for the Christians there? Because people need to understand almost half of the country is Christian, right? So this is not a situation where like 5 or 10% of the country is Christian, but there are different geographic issues. So I know I threw a lot out there, but yeah, I'll let you take it.
No, first of all, I 100% agree that the powers of evil have a special mission to persecute Jews. And as far as I'm concerned, that's a historically empirical fact, right? We just see it happening again and again and again. And it is because God has a special role for them in his plan of redemption for the world. And Christians especially, we need to be watching out for Jewish brothers and sisters and making sure that we can do everything that we can to defend them against the forces of evil. So Nigeria, 30,000 foot view. Southern Nigeria is mostly Christian. Northern Nigeria is mostly Muslim. And as you say, this is a huge country. There are 200 million people in Nigeria. So a lot of people who live in the south, for example, won't have many occasions to travel to the north. And in this sense, these can seem like 2 different countries or maybe 10 different countries, depending on how you look at it. But the region that we work on the most at CSI is called the Middle Belt. It's this big stretch of land in between north and south, where the indigenous people, the people who have lived there for centuries and centuries, are almost entirely Christian. These are hundreds of different ethnic groups that converted to Christianity when British missionaries arrived in the 19th and the 20th centuries. But the security structure of northern Nigeria, traditionally, all the military commanders, the big rulers in the north, have been Muslim. And traditionally, these groups have tried to dominate the Middle Belt. And what we're seeing today is kind of a continuation of that process, that these militia groups that are very well armed, very well funded, it's not clear where from, but they ride into a town with tons of machine guns against people who have almost nothing to defend themselves with and just massacre people. These militia groups are slowly trying to drive the Christians out of the Middle Belt so they can take that land for themselves. For the people who are doing this, it's economically advantageous. As we said, it's good to have farmland, especially in a time when a lot of Nigeria is drying up. There's also political benefits for some people in the Nigerian system. If this region is going to become entirely Muslim, that will mean that northern Muslims kind of have a lock on the electoral system of the country. So that is the main theater of violence against Christians. There's also a group in Nigeria called Boko Haram, and a related group that split off from Boko Haram to join ISIS, where they are really ideologically committed to building an Islamic state. And they are the ones who will do really spectacular terror attacks and make videos where they behead people and try to bomb planes that are flying to Georgia in the US. So those groups tend to get the most attention. And those are the groups that the United States bombed in December, for example. Those are the groups that the Nigerian government is waging war against, because those groups really threaten everybody. Unfortunately, the groups that are doing most of the killing of Christians don't threaten everybody. And the Nigerian government might even find them convenient or useful. So we're not seeing a lot of attention on what's happening in the Middle Belt. We're not seeing a lot of response to the killings from Fulani militia groups. And that's where the attention needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much here, and obviously, the Trump administration has put more pressure on Nigeria with the countries of particular concern designation coming back, but and obviously the bombings that happened there in December. So there is more happening there, but the world is on fire in so many different areas, and so it's complicated, and that makes me sort of want to transition a little bit to Iran. Because I think obviously we're in the middle of this war now, and that is complicated for many reasons. I think people have lots of different viewpoints on whether or not they think this is the right move or not. But one thing, I was reading Daniel 10, and it's so interesting when you're in Daniel 10 because you can kind of pull up Ephesians 6 and, it talks about principalities and it talks about all these different things that there's some mystery around, right? That we don't fully know. We know it's the kingdom of darkness. We know that it's demonic. A lot of people believe that principalities are essentially demons over geographic areas, right? And so when you go to Daniel 10, it's talking about, obviously you have Daniel, he has this dream, and the dream is very disturbing. He's praying about it. He's, asking God for guidance on it. And this angel makes his way to him finally, but it takes 20, he's delayed for 21 days.
Mm-hmm.
And this delay is because of this prince of Persia, right? Principality.
Mm-hmm.
And it also mentions the prince of Greece, which I think is interesting too, because Greece ends up being another problem for the Israeli people later on after Persia. But, I won't go much deeper there than to say it's very interesting. What was holding this angel up? What sort of spiritual battle was going on? And Persia, obviously, the former official name of Iran, here we are thousands of years later, still dealing with a country that very much feels like there's a spiritual stronghold around its government. And so we're in the middle of this. But before we even get into the war aspect of it, what is the situation like in Iran for Christians and other minority groups who are not the government's brand of Islam?
Mm-hmm. So as far as the Iranian government is concerned, there are two classes of Christians. First, there are Christians who are kind of born Christian or born into Christian ethnic groups like Armenians or Assyrians. And they're, according to the principles of Sharia law, the Iranian government sort of tolerates them. It allows them to have their own churches. It allows them to have worship services. What it does not allow them to do is have the Bible in the Persian language, in the main language of Iran, because that might imply that they're trying to share the gospel with somebody outside of their ethnic Armenian or Assyrian community. And we have had cases within the past year where Armenian and Assyrian priests have been imprisoned just for owning a Bible written in the Persian language. So you'll see a lot of content on the internet these days saying that you look at how great Christians in Iran have it. Not really, right? These videos or these reels are just showing you the Armenian and the Assyrian churches. And yes, they're allowed to exist, but even they are walking on eggshells basically all the time. The other group of Christians in Iran are converts, former Muslims who have converted to Christianity for whatever reason. Maybe they met Jesus in a dream. Maybe they heard about the gospel on the radio or on the internet. And these people are really severely persecuted. According to Sharia law, they can be killed. The Iranian government usually doesn't go that far, although they have in the past. Usually they'll charge them with attacking national security or terrorism or something absurd like this and put them in jail for 5, 10, 15 years. So when the war began on February 28th, there were 48 Christians in jail in Iran, according to an organization called Article 18 that tracks the situation for Christians in Iran really well. And these were almost all converts to Christianity.
I mean, it is heartbreaking to sort of watch this sort of thing unfold. And obviously, you and I were talking months ago about the uprisings.
Mm-hmm.
When you had people in Iran fed up with the economic situation, obviously the persecution situation, go down the line. Living there does not seem like it's very much of a dream at all. It seems like a nightmare. And so, you had people rising up, and there were reports of tens of thousands of people being killed. I know some of this is hard to verify. Based on what what have you heard? because I think this helps us understand the crackdown. Like, why aren't people rising up? Well, when they do, this
Mhm.
is what happens. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, what we know about what happened in January is just what was published in the international press. And as far as how many people were killed, the Iranian government itself admitted that 3 to 4 thousand people were killed. So if they're admitting that, our assumption is that the actual number is much higher. And that's an astonishing figure. I think when we spoke last time, I mentioned that in Syria, it took about 6 or 7 months to get to the point where 1,000 people had been killed. And that was a really big media event. The 1,000th person has been killed in Syria. Now we're talking potentially more than 10,000 in a matter of days or weeks. So whatever happened in January, the regime shut off the internet to the whole country, so it's difficult to know what actually happened. But it was incredibly bloody, and it probably very effectively terrorized the population against trying anything like that again.
You know, how can people right now, how can people pray? Because I know for Iran in particular, there are there are different viewpoints on whether a war is the right move, right? I think that, I can see both sides of the argument. I think a lot of people can, because you end up sometimes with a worse situation after you go in. If regime changes your goal, we know how this story goes oftentimes. On the flip side, how long can a terrorist regime continue to inflict terror on the world and nobody does anything or says anything? So it really is a catch-22 in a lot of ways. And I don't want to lead the question, but how can people be praying for this situation in particular in Iran?
Mhm. When I pray for Iran, I usually pray for peace and for freedom. These are both things that every human being needs. This is what the Iranian people need. And I don't have the expertise to say how exactly we can get there. Probably no one does. But the Lord loves the people of Iran, and we can pray. We can be in alignment with His will when we pray for peace for the people of Iran and freedom for the people of Iran. I would also recommend that people pray for one person in particular, a woman named Simin Sohelinia. This is a case that, again, was publicized by Article 18, this very good organization that tracks these cases. She has been in jail since September, and she was due to be released on an ankle bracelet just a few days before the war began, and no one has heard from her since. We assume that she was just kept in prison. But since the war began, the conditions in prisons in Iran have really deteriorated a lot. The normal prison guards are gone. Apparently, management of the prisons has been taken over by a really brutal counterterrorism force, in quotation marks. Um, it's much harder for the prisoners to get medical care, to get good food. Family visits are not happening anymore. Uh, Calls to family members are happening much less frequently than before. And a lot of people who, like Simin, were scheduled to be released have not been released. So we can pray for the people who are in prison in Iran and for Simin in particular.
Um, that is a great point of prayer. And I just want to go back to Nigeria for a minute. Can you talk a little bit about what CSI is doing and how people can come alongside your organization, both in prayer and also resource?
Yeah. We are on the ground in the Middle Belt in Nigeria. We are providing aid to people who have survived these attacks. Often that's medical aid. People just need emergency medical treatment right after the attacks. So we are able to provide funding to bring them to the hospital to make sure they get the funding they need. Uh, Thousands of people flee their homes when these attacks happen, and they need food and they need shelter. Uh, so we provide emergency relief in that form, just getting people fed, getting them into a safe place where they can stay for a temporary period of time. After that, we try to help people get back on their feet with what we call livelihood projects, where we're able to give them the funding they need to start a small business of their own, maybe buy some farmland in the place where they're now living. Um, so we are there actually. It's a strange fact. We're there often enough that I think 3 times in the past year, our teams have been there on the ground while major attacks are happening. And so it's a dubious privilege, but our team members are able to go to the hospital immediately, for example, and meet the survivors of these attacks and make sure that they have what they need. And even when our staff isn't there, our local partners always are, and they're always quick to respond. So if people feel led, they can support our work. They can go to www.csi-usa.org. Any amount of donation is helpful. That helps us bring aid directly to Christians in Nigeria, 15 other countries where we work, and also to get our messaging out about the reality of persecution in the world.
Well, I so appreciate you, giving people that information. CSI is an incredible organization. You guys are doing amazing work around the world and in Nigeria and other nations. People can come alongside you both in prayer and resource. And CSI CSI-USA.org. They can go and do that. And we'll have the link down in the description as well. And Joel, looking forward to having you back again very soon.
Me too. Thank you, brother.